Another powerful and impactful film. Thank you to all our colleagues in Albania. I'm going to hand back to Anna to give the lasting few sentences before we move on to the next session. Okay, Anna.
I just wanted to thank you, although they are not present here, but the film director, Danel Grebska, which we call him Danny, by the way. He has a very confusing name for a non-Albanian, even for Albanians sometimes, especially that surname. But he's been with us for at least 12 years, basically doing many documentaries, many videos, sometimes even for free. So when he knows you are called for a volunteer, he knows that he has to commit the same way as he would be paid. But thank you to Renata for giving us this opportunity. Because it allowed us to showcase our efforts and our work from all the stakeholders in Albania, from all the members. We, as Imelda was saying, Renata Albania is quite a large group, and we just selected 6 of them to kind of represent the whole part of the group, because otherwise it would be like ongoing and ongoing. It would be 2 hours film. But also would like to thank my leader, Ben Ryan, which basically I just had to say, I need your voice. So he just popped up with his fake David Attenborough voice and provide a little bit of break, because I know for for an English speaker or any other language speaker, it would be quite hard to just follow the Albanian language throughout the time. So I hope we kind of achieved what we aimed. And despite that, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Anna, and all our colleagues and friends in Albania. So we will move along. We're keeping to time, which is really good. It's reassuring. And the next segment is going to be headed up by the Law Task Group, who have conducted a most recent piece of research, as I had introduced earlier, and members of the Law Task Group, not all of them, but a large number of them are present here tonight. It's quite a large task group. Of the 8 task groups, I think the Law Task is the biggest one. So I'm going to hand over to Brian O'Toole to lead the presentations from the Law Task Group. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Anne, indeed. And I have the privilege of introducing some of my colleagues who will speak to the highlights of some of the research that we found. You've seen some of, and I heard people mention the heroes and the silent heroes very often who are behind a lot of the work. We wanted to identify with this piece of research another group of silent heroes. We want to bring to your attention a group who worked tirelessly to bring some light into the lives of those trafficked. And we're talking about members of the legal profession. And the research that we wanted to talk to this evening about builds on previous research that Renata had commissioned. And we undertook this research across 6 European countries: Albania, Bulgaria, England and Wales, Germany, Romania and Spain, to look at 3 particular areas. We want to look at the awareness of victims, of human trafficking victims, of their rights and legal entitlements. Then we wanted to see whether or not the extent to which they had access to these legal supports. And thirdly, what were the quality of the legal supports? And then what we found really was that the obvious needs of lawyers who work with victims of human trafficking were not being met. We found a very small group of lawyers, legal practitioners and police, who in many cases are the first trusted point of contact. And in our new research, it is clear that lawyers who are supporting victims of human trafficking or modern slavery very often do so with very limited support themselves. They're working in challenging conditions where the work is slow, the caseload is high, training is largely absent, formal and ongoing, and for very little pay, and there's no counselling, which is very often needed. In many cases, the lawyers quietly support victims long after their work obliges them to. Such is the need and the vulnerability that even though there's no pay for this extra work, there is an obvious necessity that they meet. The work is neither attractive nor lucrative, but our recent research alerts us to not only the importance of those who take on the work, but also the need for more lawyers and legal practitioners to shoulder what is an increasingly heavy burden. In our report, we conducted surveys and interviews of legal practitioners who work in 5 of the 6 countries that we mentioned: Albania, Bulgaria, Spain, Romania, and the United Kingdom. And networking is a strength of Renata. And clearly in this research, the findings are such that the collaboration appears key to making any lasting difference. The report, as it is presented, is peppered with real quotes that give a real sense of the difficulties experienced by legal practitioners who speak to their real experiences. But very often what we hear from lawyers is a plea for a joined up system that trains, resources, advocates, and supports, but only when we consider that the victim is at the centre. One lawyer explained it really well when he said, "It's not just survivors who are negatively impacted by legal aid capacity. It is also those practitioners who advise survivors. They have to manage the heavy workloads and the pressure of being a key person in a survivor's recovery journey. They have to make a decision about who they can help, and all of this can be stressful." One solicitor spoke of the fear and anxiety of working with very traumatic human trafficking cases and being so overworked that the worry of making a mistake, of dropping the ball or missing something can be catastrophic for the victim, and that this would be one reason why he might lose sleep or maybe decide not to take a case. So many lawyers spoke of the complete absence of formal training in every country we spoke of on human trafficking whilst in university. Others spoke of learning on the job, which they admit is not ideal. Some lawyers felt that this was the only way that they could operate. When lawyers are being trained, they're very often shaped and molded in such a way that their dealings with people are adversarial. They are confrontational in nature, but when a potential victim of human trafficking presents, there needs to be an empathy, a gentle patience, a willingness to wait until a relationship can be built up, and this can take time. There needs to be a learned ability to listen deeply, non-judgmentally, with their whole being, in order to be able to work with the sincerity for their new client. There is not much training for this. In this report, one lawyer put it really well when he said, "What does it mean victim-centered?" In one sentence, I would say that the victim is the leader of all our intervention. A lawyer's first advice can be around identification, and this can be supplemented by immigration advice, housing advice, legal advice, or family advice. And all of this, very suddenly, a case can become very, very complicated indeed. Indeed, there may even be criminal advice later on. Whilst there is a lot of talk of compensation for victims, there is very little success. Sometimes the interest in a victim and the level of support offered by a state is contingent upon the successful conviction of a perpetrator, and the support for a victim can melt away very quickly if a prosecution looks less likely. Lawyers remind us constantly that it is precisely the trusting nature of victims that has landed victims where they are now. So you can feel how conflicted a victim might be in placing their trust in somebody new. In all of the countries examined, there has been a commitment to reach the furthest behind first. This report comes with clear country-specific recommendations, as well as well-thought-out recommendations for Renata, for our next steps, and how we might advocate for the change that the legal practitioners are calling out for, but haven't the time to work for. When we're done here this evening, can I ask that you might take time to download the report from the Renata website and even read a few pages a day? And when you read the report, you'll feel the heartache of the victims, but you'll be heartened that there are good people who try very hard without much notice, praise, or even proper payment to make a lasting difference for damaged victims. These legal practitioners are very often at the heart of a pro bono legal network of lawyers, without which even less might be done. So now I'm going to pass you over to Mariana Mesci, our colleague from Albania, who you saw in the film that just preceded this presentation on the Law Task Group. And Mariana is going to speak to you about the results of the research as have arrived from Albania. So Albania, Mariana, I'll pass over to you. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good evening, everyone. You can see my screen, I think, my presentation. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so I will summarize the findings for Albania. Albania continues to be a country where the victims are exploited for different reasons: sexual, labor, begging, forced criminality, etc. Only last year they were identified for the first time 172 victims of trafficking, new cases, foreign nationals and domestic nationals. And we saw that new challenges came out, like the lack of interpreters for foreign victims of trafficking. But I would like to emphasize that the free legal aid is provided by specialist shelters and reception centers to all the victims of trafficking that are identified and assisted in Albania. I summarize here in this slide all the package of legal aid that is provided by the specialized lawyers in Albania. So they are involved in early engagement and rights and identification of victims of trafficking, on the assessment of legal needs, supporting a victim through the criminal justice process when they collaborate with justice institutions, ongoing legal support for survivor recovery and reintegration, in cooperation with the multidisciplinary team that works in the reintegration programs, legal assistance and protection for crimes committed during exploitation. We came across of some cases that needed support in this. Legal assistance for the compensation claims, support for entering in the witness protection programs, legal assistance in relation to immigration status, and besides all these direct supports to the victims, a lot of work is done for an advocacy and strategic litigation. I would like to summarize some good practices in this work. So the provision of a holistic and victim-centered support for victims of trafficking, especially by specialists in the shelters who works with adults and children. It's a good practice in our country. Also, there are some years that is developed a network of expert lawyers, and we also produce the guidance for providing pro bono legal aid for victims of trafficking. Another practice is the provision of legal advice to victims who are engaged with law enforcement in all the levels. We follow and support through our lawyers. During these years, our expert lawyers has organized also multi-agency trainings on trafficking and human trafficking, especially for law enforcement, including prosecutors, judges, but also service providers. Continuity of legal assistance and in long term is provided during all these years, and this is seen as a good practice too. We see that regarding the training and skills development for the legal practitioners, we see that those that were interviewed and for this research has received recognized legal education in Albania. However, their formal education did not include specialized knowledge related to human trafficking. So they have received this knowledge through other channels, like attending seminars, workshops, collaborating with legal professionals through researches, academic journals, or through networking with professionals in this field. We see that in our country, an accredited training package for legal practitioners is the way forward and should be a requirement. We do not have an accredited training package for lawyers that provide support for victims of trafficking, and this came as a finding in this research too. So this should be a step for the future. A number of core skills were identified that legal practitioners needed to have or need to develop to be effective in working with victims of trafficking. And Brian mentioned how long the process goes, so patience and ability to keep engaged over a long time, especially for trafficking cases that are complex and lengthy in time. To learn how to approach victims, especially victim-centered approach, trauma-informed approach, comprehensive understanding of indicators of trafficking, knowledge on relevant legislation related to criminal codes and victims' rights. Somebody is there. Regarding the funding for legal aid for survivors in Albania, the Albanian government provides two types of legal aid. So it's primary legal aid and secondary legal aid, but legal practitioners that works for NGOs or statutory bodies were founded to provide legal assistance that falls only within primary legal aid. So even the funding provided by government is provided only for this. And indeed, only 2 NGOs during all these years have been supported for providing free legal aid. Lawyers approved by National Chamber of Lawyers were not considered to have the expertise to provide high quality and victim-centered legal support during the often lengthy criminal justice processes, including claims for compensations. Some of the challenges that I have summarized here from Albania is, I already mentioned, ensuring rights and a victim-centered approach from all legal practitioners, not only from the lawyers from shelters or from those that provide reintegration programs. Lack of adequate knowledge about human trafficking among criminal justice actors, including police officers, prosecutors, judges, and secondary legal aid lawyers. District prosecutors do not have the specialized experience and capacity to prosecute trafficking cases successfully yet. The lack of human trafficking expertise among the lawyers who were listed as available to provide secondary legal aid by Ministry of Justice is very problematic. The delays in the criminal justice processes that goes really very long. Lack of access to compensation, and this can due to lack of compensation scheme by our government. And we are missing also a unified law on human trafficking with special focus on protection of the victims of trafficking. Also, Brian mentioned also the experience of workplace stress and vicarious trauma for legal practitioners that works directly with victims of trafficking. I will conclude by summarizing some recommendations that came from this research for Albania, advocating for a mandatory training for those legal practitioners that are funded by legal aid for secondary legal assistance, regional workshops for collaboration to enable professionals to collaborate and promote trauma-informed multi-agency responses to survivors, establish and implement a state compensation scheme. For this, we are advocating, and I hope this recommendation will be taken into consideration to promote this holistic victim support that is provided until now mostly by the shelters, and to continue to advocate for this special anti-trafficking in law, because this is will help in enhancing the rights of the victims of trafficking and especially the right to compensation. Thank you very much. I'm very open for questions at the end.
Thank you indeed, Mariana, for the second time this evening. And that was a whistle-stop tour of the challenges, recommendations, and results from the law research with regards to Albania. I'm going to call on Annie Bannister, who's a lawyer from England, who will speak to you a little bit about the research findings as they relate to England and Wales. So Annie, if you're there, you might
I'm here, yeah.
Great, thank you, Annie, indeed.
Are you going to share my slides, yeah?
And I think, has it?
Yeah, I have the slides here. Bannister, here we go. Okay, Annie, I'm just going to remove this here for a second. And you'll have to tell me when to
change, that's fine.
Yeah, exact slide show from the current or from the beginning. Okay, Annie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And I know it's been a long session so far, so I'll aim to be quick and get through the key findings that came out of the UK element of the research. So first of all, just to explain, there are actually 3 different legal areas within the UK. That's Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England and Wales, which are lumped together. I'm trained as a lawyer in England and Wales, but victims turn up in all sorts of places around the UK, and we need to call upon experts in Scottish law or Northern Ireland law sometimes to give the victims what they need. Now, we had the numbers out from the National Referral Mechanism in the UK quite recently for last year, and it's the largest number that there's been since the NRM has been tracking this, and there's nearly 20,000 that were referred to the UK National Referral Mechanism in 2024. However, on the Global Slavery Index, it does suggest that there's actually 122,000 modern slaves in the UK. So we're getting about 1/6 actually coming and registering with the NRM. So that immediately creates an issue for those victims, all those 80% of victims that aren't going on the NRM are not being allowed to get the legal support that they would if they're on the NRM. So one of the big findings that we first of all came across, and which Brian has already alluded to, is that the legal education for lawyers in the UK, and me having gone through that, I can very much confirm this, that it rarely includes human trafficking. I'm somebody very interested in human trafficking, and I sought out elements of my training to look for human trafficking modules or whatever, and they were few and far between. So what's actually happening in the UK is, as lawyers are qualifying with very little exposure to the human trafficking laws, they're only finding them out as they start practicing law and get involved in issues that come up that may involve victims. And so they start learning from other lawyers that have learned on the job. So there's not very much specialist training or formal training. It mainly is on the job and trying to work the law in the victim's favour to try and get them more than they would have got had they been with a lawyer that wasn't curious enough to try and work through the many, many laws there are out there. So if we can move on now, Anne.
Okay.
So this is really just to show you that it's not really until a lawyer's into their sort of 15 to 20 years experience level that they're getting to become modern slavery or human trafficking specialists. And that's if they've managed to find somebody or a group of people to help expose them to this area of work. And this is why we're getting so few legal practitioners actually getting into this area of work, because it's not highlighted as something to get into, and there's no proper pathway for lawyers to go in down there to get properly trained. So we can move on again, please, Anne. So just to completely muddle your brains, there are actually over 4,000 pieces of primary legislation in the UK, and that's actually within England and Wales. And many of those laws actually have an element in there which we could draw upon to help victims of human trafficking. Now, almost every criminal case that goes through our courts could have an element of compensation. But victims don't know to ask for that. And often the lawyers that are helping them don't think about that compensation in the same way that they may be thinking about the punishment for the people that they are trying to accuse and get a sentence against for their criminality. The victims get lost in the process, even though there is, in most laws, in the criminal side of things, an area where compensation could be claimed. So that is a massive area which it would be great to have more focus on, because this would make a massive difference to victims. But really, out of those 4,000 plus primary laws, many of them have other elements too, which we could, if we knew about them, we could use to help victims of human trafficking. Now, no one lawyer is going to have knowledge of all those laws. And what you end up happening is lawyers get almost siloed into very specific areas of law that they feel they can help victims with, which doesn't mean necessarily that they help victims with all the areas they need help with. And this is the challenge that we've got as lawyers and as people wanting to help lawyers out there, help victims, that we need to open everybody's eyes to how the law can help victims better. So if we can move on now, Anne. So some of the key recommendations that came out of the research in the UK was we need this new simple legal processes to ensure quick legal wins for victims. So that complexity not only confuses victims, it confuses many different people in the whole circle of and journey of trying to help victims. Because these victims' journeys are often very, very long, sometimes victims will have to deal with 10, 12 different lawyers along the way. And those lawyers, you know, don't have that joined up thinking. And this confuses victims, and it means it's less impactful for victims. So again, having this one legal contact would be absolutely amazing to try and instigate to help victims through that journey. And then how do victims find these specialist trained lawyers? It's very difficult. And often they're relying on the NGOs, the charities that are helping them to actually know of good trained lawyers to call upon. And so there is a real disconnect at the moment between the people that are on the coalface with the victims, knowing about all the lawyers that could help them, and we need to help with that. And then I couldn't finish this presentation without talking about lack of legal aid. So I talked at the beginning about this big gap of maybe 122,000 victims of modern slavery in the UK at the moment, versus just 20,000 of them actually being on the national referral mechanism. So we've got that massive gap there. Now, none of those 100,000 people will get any legal aid at all to help them with issues to do with modern slavery. Those 20,000 that have gone on the national referral mechanism may get some, but not all of them will. And this is absolutely terrible for these victims. And, you know, we need to advocate with our government to try and expand legal aid for these people. But to finish on a very positive note, you know, all the lawyers that do work in this area, you know, work so hard, they're passionate and they're impactful. We just need more of them. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you indeed, Annie. You hit on so many. The last point that you made, really, the second last point you made was about the resourcing and the fact that there needs to be far more in that legal aid. There needs to be a lot more support for legal aid. I'm conscious that Diliana Jateva couldn't make it this evening, but we had a couple of points from her, and one of them referred to exactly that, because Diliana was to speak on the issues as they related to Bulgaria. And there are really 4 or 5 things that I just wanted to mention just before we go to our final speaker, who is Sister Bogonia Inyara. And when Sister Begonia speaks, then we will have the final short film, which is about 6 or 7 minutes long. And then we will, please God, have some time for questions and answers. So if people wanted to put a question into the chat, please feel free to do so. But taking up where Annie left off there, and she spoke about the under-resourced nature of the English system in terms of legal aid. Again, it is very poorly resourced in Bulgaria. Not only that, there is an element of corruption. There is also a stigmatization of the victims that isn't apparent in some of the other jurisdictions. Some of the lawyers end up learning from the NGOs who are looking after the victims, and this is not a way that they would say themselves in order to, or that how they should actually try and learn. Many would say that they are learning on their own initiative, or some would say they're learning by looking over the shoulders of their colleagues indeed. One issue that we haven't mentioned beforehand that is a real issue that has come up across the board is that divide between the services that are available in cities and in rural. There is very little available for those victims of human trafficking who have been identified in rural parts of any of the countries that we had mentioned. And there just is that general lack of expertise of legal appointed lawyers when the state has appointed them. We're finding that a lot of, particularly in Bulgaria, where the state appoints a lawyer, very often they are not qualified to represent, because you heard Annie speak to how in England it might be a case that somebody may have would maybe need 10 or 11 lawyers by virtue of the complexity of their case, because there are a variety of different specialities in order to address all the various issues as they relate to victims of human trafficking, that this is not the case in Bulgaria as it stands. So there's just a few of the highlights that Diliana would have mentioned if she was here this evening, but technology has beaten her, unfortunately. So I'm going to invite Sister Begonia Inyara to speak to the issues as they relate to Spain, and she will be our final speaker this evening with relation to the law task force. And then we'll hand back to Anne, who will bring us the final film. So Begonia, if you're there,
Yes, I am there. I am going to share the screen.
Super, thank you, Begonia. Perfect.
Okay, I am talking about the recommendations of the Renate study for Spain. And the first recommendation was the specialized training for lawyers. And that is strengthening the legal expertise in human trafficking cases. So the key points of that, it means that there is a compulsory workshops and specialist training for legal practitioners. There are some workshops and specialist training, but they are not compulsory. So the lawyers that are not interested, they don't participate in it, and that's the problem. Then the topics of those workshops that was recommended is trafficking indicators, victims' rights, trauma-informed approaches, and justice processes. And why this collaboration with other NGOs and law enforcement for comprehensive understanding? And then why this has been done? Because there are reasons many legal practitioners lack specific knowledge about trafficking dynamics. And then the other one is that, I don't know if you can see it.
Benefit.
Can you see it?
We can.
Ensures victims receive informed and sensitive legal assistance to the victims, improving case outcomes. Those will be the benefits of it. The second one is the bar associations and specialist training should enhance that role in human trafficking cases. There are two bars associations, Madrid and Seville, that has a special part dedicated to human trafficking. And that's we would like that all the bar associations of Spain would have as model those two lawyers bar associations. Madrid and Sevilla are models of this good practice because they have lawyers specialized on that. And they have the formation for them. And another thing that is happening in Spain is that what is needed is encourage specialization, because that will improve victims' representation quality. And the context and the outcome of it, the context is that not all legal aid lawyers have the expertise to handle trafficking cases. Most of them don't have this expertise, as we have here, we have heard from the other countries as well. The benefit of having those, the Bar Association taking on the specialist training would be that having dedicated, well-trained professionals will improve victims' access to justice. So the third recommendation was advocating for a unified human trafficking law, because in Spain are supporting this organic law against human trafficking. In Spain, there are plenty of laws. I think there are more pieces of laws in 340 different parts. So there is, the key point is that we advocate there is a global law, this organic law against human trafficking, that takes together all the laws existing now, that they are separated in many pieces of law. And not only that, but till now the law, Spanish courts only recognize as human traffickers the victims of sexual exploitation, and a bit the labor exploitation, but not the others. So this new law that is already in Parliament, but it has been there for nearly 1 year, or maybe even more than 1 year, would gather together in one only law, and would be much easier for the lawyers and for the judges. Something good that we have in Spain is that we have the procurators that are, some of them are specialized on human trafficking. So this law was introduced in Parliament more than 1 year ago, and is still waiting because there is not a political will to make it pass. So the law aims at consolidate trafficking laws and improve victim protection, because now if the lawyer is not very specialized, as the judge often it's not neither, so victim has maybe laws and they don't know how to use the existing laws. The context and outcome, the reason for that is that the current legal frameworks are fragmented, making prosecution and victim support inconsistent and very difficult. The benefit will be that a unified law strengthens legal clarity, enforcement, and victim protection. The fourth recommendation was establishing legal practitioners networks, building networks of layers dealing with human trafficking for knowledge exchange and support. The key points will be to create specialized spaces for legal practitioners to share strategies and best practices with other lawyers, so that they create networks of lawyers. And then to foster international collaboration, especially with neighboring countries. That collaboration exists already at the level of the police, as at the level of the lawyers, but it's just a punctual one. It's not a regular network where there could be that share strategies and share best practices that would enrich all the lawyers of the network. And that will encourage discourse on legislation and procedure, so that they have really meetings between the lawyers regarding the law. That's what it's asking. And the outcome is that the reasons legal practitioners often work in isolation and lack access to shared expertise, often because they don't have much time, other times because they don't know other lawyers in other places, and that's really something that is making difficult the defense of the victims. The benefit will be that those networks would strengthen case strategies and improve legislative advocacy. The fifth one is promoting multi-agency collaboration, strengthening multi-agency responses to human trafficking. The key points is foster collaboration between legal practitioners, law enforcement, NGOs, healthcare providers, and stakeholders. That will be all those working, that there are networks and they work much more together. They are already working together, but not all of them. And that they will work between all those who specialize in any aspect of human trafficking. And encourage joint training and awareness initiatives. There are plenty of trainings for lawyers and for NGOs, and even NGOs and police, and they are giving information for lawyers and the two bars of Sevilla and Madrid as well, they are giving that formation. But they are not formation for all. They are just little groups, little NGO, big NGOs that are giving formation for their lawyers. For the lawyers, in general, they are less. There are 3 organizations that have formation for lawyers, NGOs that have formation for lawyers, but they are often they come lawyers, but not all the NGOs work together in that formation, for instance, and that's something that will be encouraged. And then that the responses are holistic responses that ensure comprehensive victim support. The context is the reasons because now human trafficking cases require expertise from multiple sectors, and often they are just working only one sector by sector separate, except NGOs that are trying to collaborate with all the different aspects and taking all the different aspects, but lawyers do that less. And then the benefit would be that a coordinated response increases victim protection and prosecution success rates. So strengthening Spain's legal response of human trafficking, by implementing these recommendations, Spain could enhance the effectiveness of legal practitioners, improve victim support, and strengthen the fight against human trafficking through better training, legal frameworks, and collaboration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you indeed, Begonia. I'm going to pass back to Anne now. Anne, I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Begonia, and to all the members who spoke there from the Law Task Group. Thanks again.
That's super. Thank you very much.
You might stop sharing there, Begonia, also.
Yes, I have a stop. I think I have.
No.
Your screen is still sharing.
It's still sharing.
Yeah.
You're closing it down now. You actually, I think you need to stop the.
There we are. That's it. Great, super. Thank you very much. So we'll move right along, and thank you again to members of the Law Task Group for a very comprehensive whistle-stop view of the research. But we'll move to the final film for tonight, which is called Beyond Borders, and it gives perspectives from both Ireland and the UK combined. And Sister Patricia Mulhall, who is with us tonight, will introduce the film and give us a little overview or a taster, I suppose, about the film. And my colleague Sorcha, who's with us, is going to screen the film. So when you're ready, Patricia, you can hand over to Sorcha, who will screen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anne.
Welcome.
The advocacy group of Renate, we decided that we would communicate the message, and especially through film, because a picture paints 1,000 words. And when I was looking at the film from Ukraine, I was very conscious of the fact that what we were seeing is actually taking place now as we're here, and the trauma and what's happening there is very stark. And I was struck by the fact that 76 years ago, we enacted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 76 years ago, how far have we gone? And what are we doing? But to go back to our film, Beyond Borders, Renate's mission to end human trafficking. And that is our mission, to end human trafficking. This film was mainly put together to educate, learn, to be a tool so that those of you who are dealing with this issue, whether it be in schools or in parishes or in your communities, can use the films as tools to explain and to inform. I'm very conscious of the fact that we were so lucky to have Sister Ginny George, who is a sister who was actually doing media studies in Maynooth in Ireland, and she's the filmmaker. As Pope Francis says, human trafficking is one of the most terrible scourges of our time. that disregards and disrespects human dignity and delivers large profits to people without moral scruples. The film is actually showing what's going on in Ireland and in UK. So Sorcha, if you want to play the film, please, thank you.